songs have a good way of sparking good memories sometimes. And before I came here, and I don't know what it was. It must have been historical song day or something, because we sang that in the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And when you think about the nature of these songs, they're brutal sometimes. There's a lot of truth in that brutality in there. You know, sometimes we forget the reason that Jesus came and what exactly he came to bring. And you know, we tell one part of the story, but we sometimes forget the other, kind of like we talked about this morning in Sunday school. How much of what you heard is true? It's very important that we give a high amount of our attention and our heed to what God has said in His Word and exactly what it should mean, what it does mean to be, and hopefully to everyone. We're all humans and we make mistakes, but we should never allow that humanity to become an excuse for us not to live up to God. To whom much is given, much is required. That means every person who's saved has a responsibility to God. And saved or not, everyone will answer to Him. Don't ever forget this. Turn with me this morning, if you would, to 1 Corinthians chapter 2. 1 Corinthians is one of my favorite books. Paul addresses a lot of different things in his epistles to the church at Corinth. And everything from having unity in spirit, being in one mind and one accord, to the importance of the Lord's Supper over in chapter 11, to dismissing angelic worship. I mean, he deals with every possible venue of human relationship with God and the church that one could possibly imagine. And the most two things that stick out to me about this book are the first and the second chapter. And in the first chapter, aside from giving an introduction, Paul makes it very clear, and pastors have jokingly always called this in defense of the gospel. Paul defends his manner of preaching. One of the most famous verses in the Bible, and my favorite, in 1 Corinthians 1:18, says, "For the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness, but to them which are saved it is the power of God." You can never ever forget what exactly happened that day, why it is so important. We talk about the gospel, we talk about Easter, we talk about Christmas, and we talk about all these wonderful things, and they're all great. But the power of God is shown in the judgment upon His own Son. Because that blood that flowed is your salvation and your judgment. You will either live by it or die by it. All because of a man on a cross. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about what Paul is defending so much. Over in chapter 2, he goes on in an exhortation about the power of God. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is a few assets about the power of God, how that can be useful in our lives. And we're going to read, starting with verse 1, and we're going to read the first several verses, and then we're going to come back and read some more verses later. And we'll start with verses 1 through 5. And it says this, "And I, brethren, when I came to you, came not with excellency of speech, or of wisdom declaring unto you the testimony of God. For I determined not to know anything among you, save Jesus Christ and Him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling. And my speech and my preaching was not with enticing words of man's wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, that your faith should not stand in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God." What is it then that we miss in today's society and the life that we live? It is the power of God. Many Christians live today without the power of God. They live without knowing the truth, or they live knowing the truth and denying it by their actions. Many people have gotten into a lifestyle that they will defend their Christianity to the hilt to anyone who denies it, but they themselves are not Christians by the definition of the Bible. You see, being a Christian is a lot more than being a saved person. Being a saved person is being a saved person. Being a Christian means living a life in accordance with the will of God, reading the Scriptures, teaching and preaching as God gives opportunity, if that's something you're called to do, being a part of the ministry, yes, even being a part of the church. All those things in your life and your attitude toward God and accepting what He's revealed to you as the truth as a direct reflection of how you see God. Is He your friend or is He your God? See, people can kind of blurred the lines over the last several years, and we forget sometimes that, yes, God is our friend. Jesus said, "I call you friend," so that you are no longer a servant. The servant knoweth not what the master doeth, but I call you friend. That's important. But you can't forget who God is just because He called you friend. Most people in this room, if we walk walked out somewhere and we were meeting someone that we had never seen in our lives or met before, and they were our elder, we would call them sir, or madam, or mister, or doctor, or whatever their title may be, because you have respect for them. What little respect people have for God. It's disgusting. I've seen sometimes, and it really curdles my blood. I think I mentioned this to you before. I saw another commercial last week about, and don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with inner city ministries, but when you reflect your personality on God, then what you're doing is changing God into a human. Now, let me think, if only God had ever said anything about that being wrong, like, I don't know, golden calves and statues of kings, and if there were only any biblical examples of people in their fate after they had done that. Let's see, captivity for 400 years, being cut off from the land they were promised. Surely God just is okay with being compared with any other mortal being, right? You see, that's idolatrous. We try to reflect our personality onto God as though He has to relate to us the way we think He ought to. Ministry today has also become relational. We say everything's relational. We have to relate to people. No, you don't. Jesus said that He can't relate to people. He said to be a friend of the world is to be at enmity with God. So you can't possibly meet people where they're at by being who they are. That's not the way Jesus expects you to preach and teach. You have to meet people where they're at by not accepting the sin that they do, but meeting where they are with the gospel. That's what's going to change them. But if you go to them and you try to be like them and you try to include them so that you can be one of them, so that you can... I love this theory. The theory is if I'm like you, you'll let me in, and then I can change you. But what will happen is they'll let you in, and then they'll change you. Your life will go down the toilet. Your relationship with God will suffer, and all the time you'll think you're a wonderful Christian. How dare anybody question your immaculate Christianity? See, these are the things Paul dealt with at this church in Corinth. They had a lot of problems. They had a lot of good things going, but they had a lot of problems. It reminds me several times of the book of Revelation where he uses the phrase, I have someone against you. He tells them all these great things they did. 15 verses full of wonderful things. You did all this great preaching. You've done all this great missionary work. But then he says just one striking word, and it's devastating. Makes all the good things they did look horrible. But I have someone against you. Depending on which church he was talking about, it could be as little thing as you just need to get back on track to you've lost your first love. That's a broad spectrum. And it lets you understand something about the nature of God. He's watching. And no matter how little those little things are, not only do people see Him, God does. We talked several times about churches and friends, and especially in the sense of church today, so people are so separated by doctrine, separated by understanding, because they don't want to come together. And they don't want to call themselves a name. They don't want to be branded. And they want to reach everybody, but they want to be like everybody. That's not what Jesus called you to do. When He said peculiar people, He meant because you're not like everyone else. Because there's something different in you that does not exist in the world. We're going to talk about that here in just a moment. But very important, it is close to my heart that you understand something. When Christians mess up, the world sees it 10 times harsher than if anyone else in the world did it. If I went out today and murdered somebody, boy, I'd be all over the news for the next 10 years. 20 minutes ago, nobody knew I even existed. But look what that preacher did. Look what that Christian did. Look what that goody-goody did. Satan always tries to get you right when you're going to be effective, or right when you're trying to get things right. And that's the hardest times. I'll be honest, I went through one of those times in life where I had ignorance going on, and the hardest time, it was just like a 1.5 year transition period. Even if as I had started going back to church, it's like you're still right there teetering on the edge. You got kind of 1 foot over here and 1 foot over here, and you're trying to balance. And it doesn't work. You learn real quick, just like Jesus said, that you can't serve 2 masters, one or the other. You have to decide. You can't do it. So when we go to points in our life that are like that, what's really being put before you is a decision. You can't be halfway committed. You either are or you are not. In our lives, that makes things difficult for us because as Christians, we know that, unfortunate as though it is, the Bible all but promises us that we're going to have trouble, we're going to have tribulations, we're going to have trials of every single Lord. And the more committed to God you are, I'll go a step further and say this, probably the more trials you're going to have. Because Satan don't like you. Not one bit. I'm sure that he wants plenty of people to share his faith with him, but I don't plan on being one of them. But you know what that means? Is that when we are saved, we sometimes get the wrong idea. See, that's what Christianity teaches today, is that what we call happy salvation in theological range, which means after you're saved, everything's going to be wonderful. After you're saved, excuse my expression, but all hell is going to break loose. Because he doesn't want you to influence anyone else. The best place you can be is sitting at home. You can be sitting in front of the TV. You can be sitting in church and completely oblivious to what God is calling you to do, because you have come to a point in life where you feel that, hey, I'm doing my duty. The most dangerous thing we can come to think in all hearts as Christians is we've done enough. If you think you've done enough, that shows our ignorance. There's plenty of lost people out here. There's plenty of people lost and dying going to hell. There's plenty of people that need to hear the gospel. There's plenty of nations that need missionaries. There's plenty of people here and abroad that need the truth. See, we see church as a personal decision. We're going to gratify God with our presence today. I was telling somebody one time that had asked me, and I think he meant it to be mean, but I try to turn things around on people when they try to be mean. You know, how do you preach to so few people? I said, how do you not? So I'd rather have 15 that I can trust to be faithful than 500 that I can't send anywhere. And you know, that sounds bad. But think about it. Of all the people that we come across in our lives that profess to be Christians, what makes them a Christian? Because they said so? Do you think God's going to judge whether or not you're a Christian by your view of what a Christian is? Something to think about. Paul's humility really comes through in these first verses. In verse 1 he says, brethren, I come to you, I came not with excellency of speech or of wisdom, declaring unto you the testimony of God, for I determined not to know anything among you save Jesus Christ and him crucified. That's a pretty bold start out. You just get to this place and you're just now writing this letter, and you don't even get hello out of your mouth before you're asking them, what are you telling people? That's what they want to know. That's what Paul wanted to know. Luke talks about it a little bit in the gospel that we read about this morning. Paul talks about it several times in the New Testament, and he only wants to know one thing. Are you preaching the cross? Are you teaching people about the death, burial, and the resurrection? He said, I came to know only one thing about you. I only cared about one thing. Are you preaching Jesus and him crucified? Are you teaching the truth of the gospel? Are you believing in God? Are you worshiping together as a corporate body? And it all comes down to that one little thing that we always talk about as the center of the entire existence of the universe, that cross. Are you telling people about it? The thing that misses today so much from our, quote, postmodern religion is that. Back in this book, nice old Heavenly Highway hymnal here, you can find a song, give me that old-time religion. Now, this book was published in 1954. That song's about 25 years older than this book is. Best I know, it's probably older than that. Now, can you imagine in 1920s, as conservative as the world was, they were telling people, we need that old-time religion?